First of all, though, after we talked about this, all the sciences they are based on the scientific method. So we use the scientific method in all areas of science, but we're going to focus mainly on chemistry to do certain to actually understand what we're doing and to standardize what we're doing. We use the scientific method because if all of us in all different places and all different laboratories did things our own way, there wouldn't be a way to really standardize and utilize to compare, well, is my way correct or is your way correct? But if we have the same model that we're all following, then we can standardize the results. And that way, if I'm doing something in the lab here in America, somebody in Germany can do the same thing that I'm doing and follow my results and double check to make sure that I've done it correctly or that my results are interpreted correctly, etc., etc. For this, we use the steps of the scientific method. Most of you are familiar with it, but we're going to review it anyway. The first step is to observe. It comes out of curious people, curiosity. Sometimes it kills the cat, but sometimes it's good. We get curious about the world around us, and I have found that little kids are the best at this because they are curious about everything. They observe a lot more than we do. We have become kind of, I wouldn't say callous, but oblivious because we have other things to take care of, or we've seen this many, many times, so it's not a big deal to us. Well, for little kids, little things can be huge to them. So first step is just to be able to be observant, to be able to observe something that goes on around us. The step two then would be, okay, I observed something, but I want to explain it now. Why is it that this phenomenon is happening? We then make what is called a hypothesis to attempt to explain the observations that we see. Then the next step after I make the hypothesis is I want to test it. So I make an experiment to either prove or disprove my hypothesis. That way, I have something concrete. It's not just something abstract that I came up with. It has to be something concrete. And that's why scientific hypotheses, they have to be testable. They cannot just be something that is abstract because we have to be able to devise an experiment to test it in a laboratory. And then the step 4, we repeat our experiments, maybe change them up a little bit, but if they do support our hypothesis, original hypothesis, then it becomes a theory. We will talk about all these steps in terms and what they mean, but I want to focus really on the theory and the hypothesis connection because a lot of us have been sort of misled during our years that we've studied that theory and law are the same thing, which they aren't. So let's talk about the scientific method, the hypothesis part. The hypothesis, as I mentioned earlier, it must be experimentally testable. So I have to come up with a hypothesis that I can devise an experiment for. Otherwise, it is pointless for me to talk about that hypothesis. It cannot be tested. Therefore, it is not a scientific problem. It goes into a different realm of ethics or other religion, other things. And so to really test something in the lab, it has to be experimentally testable. And then a hypothesis seeks to explain how a phenomenon works. It doesn't tell me why necessarily it works that way. It just seeks to explain. So it's seeking explanation of how something is working. And it tries to predict unknown results. Now, sometimes it will be correct and sometimes it won't. But the results have to be unknown. We don't know. That's why we test it experimentally. Now, once we know the results, we will know whether the hypothesis was correct or not. If it is correct, then we move on to something else. We find another question that we want to answer. But if it isn't, then we have to modify the hypothesis to make sure that it matches the results from our experiment. That is the hypothesis. Now let's talk about the theory part. Theory, contrary to a lot of people, what they believe is not proven. It is tested, okay, but it's not 100% proven. And we cannot 100% prove a theory. There's always new information that we uncover that surfaces, and if one piece of information will refute the whole theory, then that theory becomes null and void. We have to revise the theory to fit the experimental data. So that is why we say that the theory is not proven. Not 100%. We cannot say that a theory is 100% proven. What theory is a hypothesis that has been expanded into a general model. And this is because we have tested the hypothesis over and over and over with many different types of experiments, and it has held up so far. And so then we can expand it to a general model of observing a phenomenon. But once again, it's not 100% proven, because all we need is one piece of new information to be uncovered that goes against the theory or disproves the theory, and that means that the theory has to be revised. So it is supported, but is falsifiable. It is supported by experiments up to a certain point, but once again, it is not 100% proven, therefore it can be falsifiable. And it allows for generation of new hypotheses. So if I have a general model, I can generate new hypotheses because I have new questions that come up. Every new question that's generated will require a new hypothesis. And so I've heard it said that a good hypothesis will generate more questions than it answers. And that is how the scientific community proceeds with basically scientific research. We are constantly answering and asking new questions, new scientific questions that arise from certain hypotheses. We might have answered one part of that, but it generates another question, and so we have to write a new hypothesis and so on and so forth. So theory is more like an expanded hypothesis, that it has expanded into a general model. That is what it is. What it is not a law. And contrary to popular belief, a theory does not become a law. So please pay attention to this, because I will ask it, and students, because they've been ingrained to thinking this for years and years of school, they will say that if a theory, if it's eventually proven, it will become a law. That's not true. A theory is a theory and is different than a law. A theory is not, as we talked about in the other slide, a theory is not 100% proven. So what is the law then? What is the difference between the law and theory? The law is based on repeated observations. They do not give us explanations of those observations, but they give us a relationship. So the law is a mathematical relationship. That's what it is. Whereas a theory, it's a general model that tries to explain why we see these relationships. The law just gives us a mathematical relationship, a mathematical equation. Here, for example, is Boyle's law. It relates pressure to volume. It says, when I increase the pressure, the volume decreases. It's a mathematical relationship. It does not tell us why pressure and volume are related that way. That is for a theory to try to explain. The law just tells us a mathematical equation. That's it. And once again, contrary to popular belief, a theory does not become a law. A law is completely different than a theory. Theories may contain multiple laws, but the law cannot contain many theories. So a theory can contain several mathematical equations, but if I'm talking about one specific law, that doesn't contain many theories. It's included in a theory, but it doesn't contain any theories. It's just a mathematical law, a mathematical equation that has been observed repeatedly from many, many different experiments. But once again, the law doesn't give us an explanation. That is for the theory to try to do. The law just gives us a mathematical equation. So let's look at the big picture then. Here is my, if I observe, this is my observation and curiosity. I form a hypothesis, and then I perform an experiment. If the results are consistent with my hypotheses, it contributes to the body of knowledge. And constant observations will become a law, but not necessarily the theory. The law, this will be a mathematical relationship that comes out of all these observations that we're making. The theory, however, tries to explain what we observe by a law. And then you can see where all this, most of the work that's been done is right here. We form hypotheses, we test them. If they agree, great. If they don't, we'll revise the hypothesis, or we'll make a new hypothesis. And so this cycle goes on for much longer than this part over here. But I want you to be very clear between the difference between the law and the theory. These two are not the same, and nor does a theory ever become a law. They're two different things. The law is a mathematical relationship. The theory is a general model that tries to explain what we observe from a law. So that is important. I will stop the part 1 of the lecture here, and then I will continue with the phases and classification of matter in part 2.